I haven't talked to anyone today all day. I've been up here writing and studying, so my mouth is... Alright, hello Dreamies! Esther Nuna here today in Pohang, where Handong International Law School is located on the east coast of South Korea. We are here with Jennifer Trahan. Jennifer is an American legal scholar, lawyer, and academic. She's a clinical professor at New York University's Center for Global Affairs, my professor, and directs their concentration in international law and human rights. So welcome to my segment, Professor Trahan.
Trahan, thank you. Thank you, Esther. It's great to be with you today.
Are you usually a morning person? Are you in your home or office?
I'm not, Esther. I had to get up for this.
Oh my God.
No, I'm normally up, but I'm delighted to be here with you today.
Why don't you tell the audience about what you do, why you're so busy? Because I know, but they don't. So let's hear it.
Yeah, thanks, Esther. Well, as you mentioned, I teach international law and related topics at NYU Center for Global Affairs, which is basically an international relations school. So I'm not actually at the law school. I'm more teaching international relations students, but about international law, which is basically the law among states. It's what is practiced at the UN. And I also focus specifically on war crimes prosecutions and war crimes tribunals. And when we're not in the middle of COVID, I take students to The Hague, Bosnia, and Serbia, and then in another trip to Rwanda. And we see justice on the ground and accountability and countries recovering from mass atrocities. Other fields I work on are cyber warfare and the Rome Statute. We had a launch of a report on that yesterday, how cyber attacks could, if extreme enough, fall within the prohibitions of genocide, war crimes, crimes against humanity, or the crime of aggression. I also write a lot on the crime of aggression, where I am head of the Council of Advisors on the Prevention of Aggression. I write on a lot of use of force issues, take students to the UN, interact with UN legal advisors. So I do make use of being here in New York. And prior to all this, I was actually a lawyer.
On top of writer, professor, advisors, and everything. So you are a lawyer.
So my career started off as being a lawyer. So I went to first NYU Law School and then went to a big law firm for 10 years. I didn't really envision staying for 10 years. I thought, I'll go for a couple of years and pay back my student loans. But then I actually really enjoyed it. So I was in litigation because the New York City law firms, you generally choose your department. And I litigated about a variety of different topics, from leverage leases to RICO, which is a racketeering statute in the US, a will contest. I repossessed an airplane. Insider trading cases, so a whole variety of cases. But then at some point, I decided, is this what I want to do with the rest of my life? And I transitioned to international law. I actually went and got a second law degree at Columbia Law School. And then I went to Human Rights Watch for a number of years and worked in their international justice program before I became a professor. So I've kind of had three manifestations in international law: as a practitioner in the private sector, and then practitioner at Human Rights Watch, and then a professor.
Oh, wow. So you didn't become Jennifer Trahan just born like that. You had to climb up and go through all the rerouting. And
I had figured it out to begin with. I could have directly become a professor, but I did it. But I don't think I regret it, because at the law firm, I learned very good skills about writing and gathering evidence and putting together an outline of proof. And this became useful at Human Rights Watch, and it's useful in my writing now as a scholar. So it's good to have a law firm background, because it teaches you a lot of skills. You do, and I did, direct and cross-examination in court. So I did get into court some in my career. It was a big law firm, and in a big law firm
in New York.
In New York.
Oh my God.
Court that much. So a smaller law firm, lawyers get into court more. But I did, and it was very much fun. I wanted to go into international law, and I wanted to have a family. So that coincided, and it made sense then to leave a large law firm to be able to do both of those. Is so much more interesting than what I did at my big law firm.
Oh, I definitely agree. Yeah, with that said, so I really want to go to Hague and Yugoslavic trip with you. So please make that happen. I'm coming.
I hope so. We just have to make COVID end so I could start traveling with my students again.
Of course, of course. It sounds like a decade worth of experience at big law firm is enough for you to go to the next step. But why did you go back to Columbia Law School? Was NYU Law not enough?
Yeah, no, at NYU, I mainly focused on courses how to be an American lawyer. So I took the very typical courses. I did take a couple in international law, but when I took my law degree, it was before the Yugoslav and Rwanda tribunals, for example, existed. I think if I had done it a few years later, I might have headed from law school right to The Hague. But my law degree is older. So I actually was thinking I'd like to go into international law already during my first law degree, but I didn't really see a good career path. So I went to a big law firm and tried that and enjoyed it and earned a lot of money.
And paid off your student loan.
My student loans very quickly. A professor and Human Rights Watch, at NGOs, you don't earn so much money. But for me, I found it much more enjoyable, much more interesting. So I haven't really regretted any of my career moves, although they're certainly not direct ones.
Is international lawyer even a thing? You said you went to LLM, and did you take a certain specific exam for that?
There is no international law exam. Sometimes courts have requirements, for instance, to qualify for the defense bar before the International Criminal Court. I believe there's a list of requirements. There is no international bar exam. So most lawyers also take the normal bar exam. It's good to have coming out of law school in case you do end up anything that looks like the practice of law, you need a law degree for. So even if you're going into international law, you often will need to take the bar exam. And then international law is not even on it. In America, it would be the U.S., constitutional law, torts, civil procedure, criminal law. It would be the U.S. topics. Yet you can't practice law at all without being licensed somewhere. So even if you go into international law, you need to take the bar exam.
Right. And for the US law, I believe that each state, the bar exams are different, right? So, for example, if I'm a Michigan lawyer, I cannot practice somewhere outside of Michigan, something like that.
Sometimes you can waive in. So if after certain years, there's sometimes waivers, but basically that's right. If you, I've taken the bar exam in New York, so I am allowed to practice in New York. There are sometimes waivers, but not always. The California bar exam is good for California. And we do have different bar exams within the United States. But that said, if I were to then practice international law before some other tribunal, I think I simply need any American bar exam. I simply need to have passed a bar exam because there isn't one specific to international law. LLM is typically used when foreign students come to the United States and they've maybe had undergrad law. They often take the LLM. So I was there as an American getting an LLM, and that raised, everyone was asking, why is an American getting an LLM? But I wanted to get more knowledge, specifically on international law. But it's a very typical degree for foreign students to get when they come to the United States to learn American law topics and to prepare for the bar exam. I'm only in my LLM chose all courses: public international law, laws of war, UN law, international criminal tribunals. I interned, this goes back many years, interned at the UN. I interned at an NGO. So it was my focus on international law.
As a person who never dreamt of being a money-making big lawyer, like competitive, aggressive lawyer in Biglaw. I don't think I would ever make it either, but you had an option and you thrived in it, but your passion was in a different place. I see it personally, it's a very noble choice.
I guess I was thinking of leaving my law firm, and a lot of colleagues of mine who were leaving, because it's really, you stay for a certain period of time, you make partner or you don't. And whereas I thought I could potentially make partner, I also was interested in having children. And I worked horribly long hours at my law firm, and I saw it as completely incompatible with having children. So it was part and parcel of deciding I want to have kids, and I can't keep working 70 hours a week every week, and thinking, well, what else could I do? And a lot of my friends were becoming in-house lawyers at corporations, so they would do maybe their contracts for a big company. That does not at all appeal to me. And I was actually at the New York City Bar Association just for interest, watching of a program called International Law Weekend.
Right, which is this weekend, right?
It's this weekend. Many years ago, was listening to such a panel discussing international law, and I decided this is what I want to do. So it was really a light bulb moment. I decided this is going to be so much more interesting than any of my other options. But I felt I hadn't really studied international law when I had done my JD years before. So I went back to law school. So this is an unusual path.
Of course. It's interesting that you mentioned that NYU Law School, back in your days, they did not really have many options about international law, because according to US News 2022, NYU Law ranks #1 in the international law program and #6 in best law schools, tied with Penn Law for 2022. Are the rankings and school brand all that important? Like, in order to be a
I will just
lawyer?
say, I mean, NYU did have good international law when I was there. So I got to study with Ted Marone, who went on to become the president of the Yugoslav Tribunal, an important judge, and Tom Franks. So I had good professors. I didn't at that point see a career path, and they very nicely set you up to become a lawyer at a big law firm. So that is very clear. Like, they recruit you,
Gotcha.
very easily.
Big city
so that was,
and
and I was right there. So that was a very clear path, and I took it. Rankings. So I will say there are a number of very top U.S. law schools, and it probably doesn't matter which one you go to because they're all so good. And of course, you want to consider where you want to be, and look at their courses, but they're all top and open doors if you do well. If you're at the bottom of a top law school class, I don't know that it helps you that much. And then, I always think they're middle ranking law schools, and they're perfectly fine as well.
What's middle? So let's say 1 to 14 is the top 14 law school, and middle is like until 14,
when you get to
15.
lower ranked law schools, it is more competitive for Americans whether they get jobs. At one point, we were producing too many lawyers. There were just too many. And in my day, pretty much anyone who came out of law school could get a law firm job. Then that did change. So then it did matter. So lower ranked schools, you might have more difficulty. That said, if you're the top of either a lower ranked or middle or top, I think you have a good career path ahead of you. So I wouldn't get too caught up in rankings. I always encourage my students, and sometimes I have students who go from studying with me and then they say that they want to go to law school. I just say, shoot for the moon, but have backup plans. Have some, reach schools is sometimes a term you might use, some top level, have some middle, have some backup, and see where you get.
So if your children came up to you and said in 2017, I want to be a lawyer, and their era would be different, because how they say robots are going to take over the world and some jobs are not going to exist. We don't know if the earth is going to exist anymore, to be honest. But what would you say? Like, how do you view the legal profession is going to span out in the future?
Hopefully it won't look too different than it looks today. but it's hard to tell. I like being a lawyer. Lawyers love incredible precision to detail. So if you are someone who's very detail-oriented and you want to think of clever arguments and clever nuances to arguments, and you want to make sure you have all of the logic and there are no logic gaps and that you necessarily win, that kind of persuasiveness and attention to detail, that makes a good lawyer.
And no robots can beat that.
I don't think robots will do that. I know we have artificial intelligence developing and taking some jobs. I don't think they're going to take the lawyering jobs. And the more technology we have, we seem only to need lawyers more. It's generally a growth profession, despite, sometimes we have some downturns. But if you really love attention to detail, clever arguments, then you have the makings of a good lawyer. If you want to make sure all your footnotes are perfect and, it's really persuasive for the judge, and that's the kind of attention to detail that you want. So you can be a lawyer who's in court. That wasn't particularly, I didn't do a lot of that. So you can also be someone who's writing all the arguments. So there's room for doing both sides of that. I think in court is more glamorous. It's
of course charismatic and
so they're both types. And you can even be in court in international law. I mean, there is a practice. There's international arbitration as a field. The International Court of Justice in The Hague litigates disputes between states. And there are lawyers and judges there. There are lawyers at the International Criminal Tribunal. So you can actually be a lawyer in the international law arena. And of course, at the UN, all of the states have delegations with lawyers on them and at their missions in the UN and around the globe. So Court of Arbitration at the International Court of Justice, and then there is a litigation court. So there's both. And they have judges there. It would be states that bring their delegations to The Hague. So they're not always there. So the parties would have cases that are brought. The nuclear weapons case, there's an example that we study in our textbook.
Of course.
It was considering the legality of the use of nuclear weapons, argued to the International Court of Justice. That was actually somewhat different. It wasn't a contentious case between two parties. The General Assembly asked for an advisory opinion. Could the court give advisement? And then the arguments were heard and the court ruled. So that's an example. Sometimes you have states suing each other. Bosnia sued Serbia for genocide a few years back. That wasn't a criminal case, but a civil case, and prevailed that Serbia had failed to prevent genocide under the Genocide Convention. So those are, and there are a lot of disputes about fishing, about boundaries, territorial issues, all kinds of disputes.
War crimes, right?
Yeah. And then we have the criminal tribunals doing the war crimes prosecutions, and those are separate tribunals. The International Criminal Court in The Hague, there's one in Phnom Penh, there's one in Central African Republic. So there are a few of these international criminal tribunals. And there are also, you can also litigate before human rights courts, the European Court of Human Rights, Inter-American Court, the African Court on Human and People's Rights. So you could be a litigator in the human rights field as well. So there are many different possibilities.
So what I want the listeners, our dreamies, to remember is it's not all the American lawyer and one path to be a success American dream, Korean dream. There are so many different paths of being a international lawyer. For the last but not the least, what would you tell the next Jennifer, the future lawyers who want to be where you are right now? How would you encourage them to navigate and survive?
I would say work hard, be diligent, but also it does help to network So at a certain point, I think work hard and be diligent through school. But when you get out actually into the real world, it does matter. You know, you might think, oh, why are people going to lunch or having coffee? But you actually make connections in these informal times. And that's true of international law as well. And you can, and that is a valuable side. So it's working hard, being diligent. And I guess my final advice is shoot for the stars and have backup plans. So, you know, try to do what you really want to do, try to figure out a way. And just in case that doesn't work, do have some other ideas out there. So.
Gotcha. Spoken like a true lawyer, realistic, but still shooting for the star. Thank you so much for coming to the show today. And hopefully I'll see you in January in person so we can continue the conversation.
It was my great pleasure, Esther. Thank you for inviting me, and I look forward to seeing you in person as well.
All right. Bye, Professor.
Bye.